Making a AAA game isn't just about technical skills. It's about navigating the messy world of creativity. Our next speaker knows this better than the most, having evolved from an entry level to a lead designer at Naughty Dog. He has touched everything from combat systems to emotional narrative design. Please join me in welcoming Grant Jackson.
Hello, SINFO. My name is Grant Jackson. I'm a lead game designer at Naughty Dog, and this is 4 coins, lessons in contradiction from a career in game design. I want us to start with a quote by author and professor E.L. Doctorow. He's talking about writing a novel, and he says, writing a novel is like driving a car at night. You can see only as far as your headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way. I think about this a lot, and I think Doctorow captured something here, not just about writing, but any creative act, including, if you'll allow me, making games. Game development is an often ambiguous, nebulous challenge. It involves striding confidently forward into uncertainty. And like any creative work, not only is it unpredictable, but it often involves holding 2 competing truths in your head at the same time, and still figuring out a way to take those steps forward. That idea, that inherent ambiguity, is what inspired this talk. 4 double-sided ideas, 4 coins, each one representing some of my philosophies and approaches to game design, to creativity, and, if you'll indulge me, to life itself. Sound good? Great. But before we start, I want to give you all a quick primer. This isn't going to be a super technical talk, but I do still want to make sure that, like any good designer, I'm not assuming that there's any information that I have that you all don't have. And so we're going to go through each part of this and break it down a little bit. To start, a video game is a form of electronic entertainment used by... Oh, sorry, this is a games day. Everybody knows maybe what a video game is? Okay, sorry, hold on. Give me one sec here. Shoot, sorry. This is not... wahoo! Okay, this is... okay. What is being a game designer at Naughty Dog? What is Naughty Dog? Well, Naughty Dog is a first-party PlayStation studio. We're a Sony studio. We're over 40 years old. We're one of the oldest game studios in the world. Our breakout PlayStation titles were in the Crash Bandicoot series, then Jak and Daxter on PlayStation 2, and now we're best known for our tentpole franchises. We've got the rip-roaring Uncharted, the dramatic Last of Us, many of whom might be familiar with our recent HBO adaptation as well, and then actively in development, our newest franchise, Intergalactic. Now, just to head it off, both for now and for the Q&A afterward, unfortunately, there's nothing really I'll be able to talk about just yet for Intergalactic. I know, I really want to too. I would love to share more, but I would also love to still have a job when I get back to California. So with a primer on Naughty Dog out of the way, let's talk a little bit more about me. Who am I? What is my path here, and how did I get here? Well, I'm Grant. I was born and raised in Washington, D.C. in the United States, as you can tell by my very upstanding capitalist attire. And I grew up a pretty generalist nerd. I was interested in all kinds. I played some sports. I did a lot of music stuff growing up. But mostly I just loved reading, tech, and playing games. I got really lucky, too, because I was raised in a family where gaming was considered a really valuable family activity, just like going to the movies together or playing outside. I was a Nintendo kid, and my family was very invested in my little sister and I playing games at a very age-appropriate level. It was moderated out over the course of my childhood. Here, for example, is me and my grandmother, my Grammy Gail, playing the GameCube, and I love that she's having a ton of fun while I am clearly absolutely locked in. So because of that general geekery, when I got to college, I actually had no clear idea what I wanted to study. Or That's not quite right. I actually had a very clear idea that I wanted to study all kinds of different things. I studied computer science. That was my primary major, but I also did a lot of music stuff. I dabbled in improv comedy. We're going to come back to that later. But also psychology, philosophy, literature, physics. I was a nerd about a lot of different things. And when it came down to computer science, which I know a lot of folks here in the room might have as their kind of course of specialty, I really enjoyed what I was learning, but I found there were classmates of mine that were extremely invested in programming and in technical expertise. And I found myself a little bit challenged to get that excited and into the very, very deep specifics of computer science. And I found myself always hankering, partly because of so many of these other areas of interest of mine, for a broader, more storytelling, entertainment-driven, narrative kind of work. And of course, that led me back to games. It took a little while, but I had that light switch flip that I think a lot of creative folks have, which is, oh yeah, this is a medium that doesn't just spring into existence. It takes people to make these games, and they're doing all kinds of different work to do so. So that brings me to summer after my third year. I was fortunate enough to grab an internship at Activision Blizzard. This is my little sister and I at our first E3 conference, RIP E3. And then as fourth year rolled around, our senior year of undergrad, I had a lot of different irons in the fire. I was thinking potentially about grad school. We have master's programs in interactive media and entertainment. There were a lot of different job applications to studios big and small, many of which I was rejected from or didn't hear back from. But one of those special opportunities for me my senior spring was a chance to attend the Game Developers Conference. GDC is a big conference every spring in San Francisco. And I went as one of these fine folk, a conference associate. So setting up talks, helping guide people to the lost and found. And for me, that was a chance not only to learn more about the industry and meet either professors that I was interested in, but it just so happened that at the tail end of that week, I was able to connect with some of the folks at Naughty Dog. The Last of Us Part 2 was just ramping up into really strong, intense development. And from there, 2 weeks after I graduated in 2018, I moved out to California and started as a game designer at Naughty Dog. And now 8 years later, I'm still doing an evolution of that same role. Let's play a quick game of Spot the Goofball. There he is. So that's who I am, my path on the way to being a game designer at Naughty Dog. So let's go over what being a game designer actually means. Because in the most abstract, game designers are thinking about everything that makes a game a game. So I know we have different levels of experience here. There are disciplines in games like animation, writing, programming, visual effects. All of these have analogs in other media, animation, for example, writing in film and literature. And that's not to say there aren't unique challenges to those disciplines in making video games. Of course there are. But game design is one of the least translatable to another form of media because the interactivity of a game is the purview of the game designer, and it is the thing that makes a game interactive, or makes a game, makes it a unique medium. And so we're thinking about the player experience at its most broad level. But that's really broad, and on every team, the term game designer can mean something different. So let's chat through the way that we do it at Naughty Dog. Another round of Spot the Goofball. There he is. Let's look at a level that I worked on in Last of Us Part 2. This is codenamed Patrol from early on in the game. This is Ellie and Dina early on riding out into the suburbs of Jackson on horseback, checking an abandoned neighborhood for infected and supplies. So to start, we have what we term layout design. A layout designer is thinking first and foremost about space. They're using 3D modeling tools, in our case, Autodesk Maya, to block out the design of the level. And as you can see here, it's really simple shapes. And that's so that we can iterate fast and move whole buildings and rivers and paths around rapidly as we test and understand whether a level is playing and flowing correctly. We're really trying to suit the narrative and gameplay goals of a given beat of the project. Just to note, this mostly isn't what I do. On this level, for example, we had my talented buddy Jonathan Gregoire doing the layout of this space, and I joined him as a technical designer. In this case, level scripting, what we would refer to as. This was my main area. So that's using our internal scripting language. We have a text-based scripting language called DCX. It's a fork off of Lisp and Scheme back in the day. It's very quirky, but delightful. And our internal level editor toolkits, like this one, in order to implement things like combat setups, cinematic scripting, NPC behavior, including buddy behavior. So I spent a really long time having Dina, your companion, ride just the right distance ahead of the player in order to hold a conversation back with me, but not so slow as to be making me feel like I was gummed up on her, and et cetera. It also includes designing our big set pieces, our big action moments. Very low-level technical things like asset loading, material scripting, can cover a broad swath of things. Another aspect of technical design from level scripting is systems design. So material systems, player progression systems, combat systems, both on the enemy side and on the player side, on the ranged side and on the melee side. And, near and dear to my heart, interactable and minigame systems like the guitar system from Last of Us Part 2. All of these systems have designers at their core who are owning the vision, iterating on feedback, and interfacing with all of the artists, animators, programmers, sound designers, and pretty much every other discipline in order to make a given system sing. Shameless plug, I'm not going to be going too in-depth to it here, but if you want to learn more about the guitar system specifically, check out the GDC talk that my buddy Mark Burrows and I gave on the system back in 2021. Okay, last piece of the puzzle, and then we'll get to the coins, I promise. It's a relatively recent one for me, but how have things changed now that I'm transitioning into being a lead? Well, now we're on day 2,864 at Naughty Dog, and by and large, my job now is less about what I can individually shoulder and implement into the game, and much more about supporting, guiding, and advocating for my designers on the team. Naughty Dog's leads are still what we call working leads or craft leads. So we don't delineate between people leading the project and people leading the people. We, for example, don't have separate roles for lead or director and manager the way that some studios may. So that means my job includes both of those things. It's both answering high-level design problems and asking high-level questions, but also coordinating my swath of the technical design team in order to solve those. But I think that's a really great thing. It ends up putting the emphasis on the project itself and on making sure that the career growth and the skills built and mentorship for different members of the design team are inextricably linked with the thing that we're all actively pushing on building. Okay, you all have been patient enough, so let's get to these coins of contradiction. Like I said, these are double-sided takes. Everything's ambiguous. Not every side applies in every situation. Some sides will come more naturally than others to people, and often there's a case to be made in a given situation for either side of a coin. I'm not going to be able to solve that for you. Isn't that awesome? Coin number one, be kind. I was really glad to see that Zoe, who just spoke before this, included a large focus on empathy in her talk. Kindness is something that too often goes either completely unmentioned or tagged on at the end as a little footnote of discussions like this. But to me, it's important enough to put right up front. It takes people to make art. It definitely takes people to make games. And it definitely takes a ton of people to make a AAA title at the scale of a Naughty Dog project. All of those people have their own passions, their own skills, their own strengths, their own weaknesses, their own circumstances, their own goals, their own lives. Making a game together means aligning all of those myriad variables into as unified a momentum, as shared a vision as we possibly can. And that all starts with empathy, with listening to understand, and being curious. The other people at Naughty Dog rule. I know for a fact that one of the biggest ways I've been able to succeed there is by genuinely caring about how those people are doing, what they need, and how to communicate and collaborate in good faith in a way that makes everybody feel as enthusiastic as we can moving forward. Flip side of coin one, be ruthless. Specifically, I mean be ruthless with your craft. At Naughty Dog, we are always striving to be the best that we can possibly be. When I got here, I got to know the different ways that people took that. A lot of folks count it as a point of pride. And when it comes to being the best, that's not just in friendly competition with our peers in the industry, but also in competition with our former selves. Every single project striving to be better than the last in some way or push the boundaries. I don't mind that outlook, but my ruthlessness was honed in a slightly different category of work. My drive for us to be the best, and for me to do the best that I can, comes less from a competitive edge and more from thinking about our players. My critical eye has been sharpened by wanting to do right by those players, and by wanting to craft for them an experience as special, as immersive, and as engaging as I've had with games, including with a lot of Naughty Dog titles. And so to be ruthless means to scrutinize everything, even ideas that feel set in stone or have had a lot of time and energy invested in them, if it's in service of making the work better. I'll use an example from Last of Us Part 2. In that same patrol level from earlier in the game, we had to teach the player a number of core mechanics about the game, because it's an introductory level. And one of those was stealth, how to sneak around without being heard or spotted, especially because we had this cool new analog stealth grass that we really needed players to understand. So in our original macro for the level, the beat diagram describing the main important points, this moment was pitched by our directors as a beat where something spooks the player's horse, the player is knocked off, horse kind of saunters away, and the player has to learn about stealth by sneakily approaching the horse in order to get back on and calm it down. And I see where they were coming from on it. Not only is this a cool opportunity for your buddy Dina to be cracking wise from the sidelines and throwing jokes and insults, but it's also tutorialization 101, not to teach a complex mechanic under tension, so that players can fail freely, and their only punishment is that their horse skitters away to a slightly different area of the zone, rather than, being brutally torn to shreds by an infected. But as I started to prototype the sequence, it kept feeling really wrong. Because to teach this mechanic in a way that would actually make sense for players using it later on in the game, we had to use the threatening "I'm about to spot you" audio drone that plays so that the player could tell where the boundaries of safety were on the grass. And we had to have a triangle button prompt on the horse that mirrors the stealth takedown prompt for players when they encounter real enemies in the wild. Which means no matter what we tried, the emotional core was the same. It really felt like you were sneaking up to murder your horse. We tried different layout orientations, we tried different levels of generosity for the perception of the animal, but no matter what, this feeling was wrong. So I did what we often do in the Naughty Dog design department. I finished the prototype, I handed my lead the controller, and I used it as the best possible evidence for why I felt we should cut the beat and instead find a different way to teach the player about the mechanics of stealth in a way that felt more emotionally aligned with that tense, dangerous feeling that stealth gameplay has everywhere else in the game. It was the first time I remember really pushing back on direction and launching into the kind of healthy, creative disagreement that is now my everyday life. Now, in some ways, this may seem like a really niche story, but I use it as an example because that's how granular you have to get. Every inch of your craft deserves the level of ruthless scrutiny towards making it the best that it can be. That, I think, transitions us nicely to coin number 2. Be flexible. Like in the horse example, there's always another way that a thing could be. And especially as a designer, we are always iterating, sometimes to a fault. Sometimes it's because we've got a new problem to solve, or someone's had a new cool idea. Other times it's because a new constraint has entered the field. Some other discipline has come back saying that something is too expensive or too time-consuming in order to do the way that we thought. So we need to be ready to pivot. Circling back to my college years, this is actually where I lean on my skills in improv comedy. I find myself thinking a lot about improvisation, and genuinely, earnestly, I think the skills and mentalities that I developed there around listening and reacting, around making strong choices but holding ideas loosely, have served me better in many ways than any programming class I ever took. Those skills are my headlights for E.L. Doctorow's nighttime drive. One more game of spot the goofball. There he is. Okay, moving on. Flip side of coin 2, be firm. While some things are worth holding lightly and bending around, there are other core principles you'll encounter that are worth standing firm on, even through challenges. As an example here, I like to think about accessibility in our games. For those who don't know, Naughty Dog has a special pedigree in our recent titles for accessibility, making sure our games can be enjoyed by as broad a swath as possible, as fully as possible, with players with visual, auditory, motor, or other kinds of disability needs. When I joined on part 2, I was struck not just that we were thinking about this and that we were thinking as deeply as we were about it, but for all the granular efforts along the way that it took, even though it meant more hard work and problem solving on our end. There were dozens of chances along the way where we could have shortcut or scoped down or trimmed on these features, but members of the team, I'll give a special shout out on the design side to Matthew Gallen and Amelia Schatz, were adamant, then committed to the vision of making this the most accessible game, not just that we could, but that we had put out in our history. And looking back, I'm so grateful that that firm commitment to that vision was modeled for me, because I think that's so worth it. And it's so easy when you're down in the trenches to forget the adherence and the adamance to stand firm on something like this. Okay, 2 coins down, 2 to go. First side of coin 3, be focused. It's important to find your niches as a developer. This is true not just in games, but in whatever kind of work that you choose to do. Listening to your passions and your strengths, carving out for yourself some disciplines that you can have deep knowledge of is really essential. Not just for career progression or getting jobs, but also for once you are working on something. It takes deep expertise to be able to lend the kind of ruthless scrutiny to something that we were talking about in coin 1. Alongside some of the music design work that I was talking about earlier, one other niche passion of mine has been haptics, the sensitive and tactile vibrations that come from the latest DualSense PlayStation controllers. This is super specific, but the depth of knowledge and understanding to lovingly craft a very tactile vibration and trigger experience on our controllers has taken me a long way and has been an unexpectedly delightful slice of design. I want to call out here, this note, be focused, is the advice I perhaps received the most consistently coming up in creative fields. I do some music stuff as well, some composing, and whether it was in games or composition, I frequently was hearing things like, find the thing that makes you stand out, and double down on what makes you different. And in music, for example, be the best horror composer that you can possibly be, like find a very specific slice of skill. And I think there's merit to that. I think that's all well and good. But it's sometimes bumped up against my general geekery, my interest in a variety of things, and my uncertainty about which one of those things to focus in on. Which is why I got to compliment it with, be broad. I mean be broad in 2 ways. First, outside of games, or whatever your chosen field may be. I think there's value in living a broad life. Read, or write, or do sports, or do theater, or hike, or learn to make really good coffee. It doesn't really matter what the hobby is, as long as there is one, or ideally several. Although, I will give a special emphasis toward interests without goals of mastery or metric. Don't be afraid to do something badly just because it interests you or intrigues you. In my experience, that will repay tenfold with inspiration and energy. But I also mean be broad in terms of breadth in your craft. I think in many ways I've found success at Naughty Dog because I was someone our studio could just throw at problems. I've done, in my time, melee scripting, level scripting, narrative work, material systems, music design, controller work, player systems. And a generalist mindset has helped me not just tackle a variety of problems, but also more easily interface with collaborators in other disciplines, meeting them where they're coming from. All that broad, general geekery I mentioned back in college, interest in storytelling, psychology, comedy, music, art, animation. I am not an expert in any of these things, not even close. But I know enough to listen earnestly to someone who is, and to problem solve together with them from close to the same wavelength. Okay, last coin. Be serious. Game design is hard. I'm not just referring to the job market or the development process. I'm not just talking about crunch or creative burnout. Those things are real and they are serious. But there's an added layer of responsibility that comes when you put a piece of art out into the world, big or small. There's a responsibility to your team to collaborate in good faith. There's a responsibility to your players to respect their time and attention, to give them the most enriching and engaging experience you possibly can. And often, there's a responsibility to the subject matter. In the world of The Last of Us, we've told stories regarding religion and xenophobia, violence and grief, and LGBTQ identity. And in many ways, the immersive nature of games holds even more power to impact players than other media psychologically. Respect that power, the power of play. Take it seriously. But not too seriously. Flip side of the last coin, be playful. Be silly. We make games. It sounds so simple, but trust me, it's so easy to forget, especially when you're in the thick of it. We get to make games, and games are for playing. That playful mindset extends deeper into Naughty Dog DNA than I think folks might think. We're certainly a narrative-focused studio. We've certainly told a lot of dramatic stories. But some of our most memorable elements actually came about reverse-engineered from a rule of cool what if, not, and now is the part of the story where our protagonist falls out of a plane, but wouldn't it be cool if you fell out of a plane? Okay, how do we get there? What do we need to do in order to make that moment happen? How do we get there? Well, like everything we've gone through today, we get there messily, ambiguously, contradictorily, difficultly, delightfully. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much for your work.
Absolutely.
So now we have quite a time for a few questions.
A little Q&A.
Hi.
Hi.
First of all, excellent keynote.
Thank you very much.
I'm not from the area, so this is coming from a pure player point of view. I love games and specifically Naughty Dog games. And you're a company that specifically with recent games focuses on games with such a powerful message and such technical advancements, yeah? So my first question is, did you expect that while developing the guitar system to be something that completely blew out into the community? Like there's people playing real songs with the system, How did you feel about that? And in the same current of thought, how do you deal with player expectations? Yeah, sorry.
No,
how do
sorry
you
at all.
deal with expectations, and how do you find balance between the art you want to make and what the player wants to see?
Two really good questions. What's your name again?
Ivo.
Ivo? Say again.
Ivo.
Thank you, Ivo. Appreciate it. Okay, so first up, on the guitar system and on expectations in general. I'm kind of an optimistic guy, and so I certainly was hoping for the kind of experience that the guitar system went out into the world. I was never certain about it, but my buddy Mark and I, Mark, for those who don't know, Mark did a little bit more of the heavy technical lifting on the design side for the guitar, and I was kind of a music advisor, able to help kind of design aspects of the music theory and the interactivity. And he and I used to joke/not joke about what if this were something that players would play for themselves, what if this were something people would share videos of them playing songs on the guitar. And it was always just that would be cool if. But it was never a definitely this is absolutely going to happen, which is why it was really flattering and exciting to see that it got that kind of response, and then got memed on by people posting full like audio clips behind it as though they were completely shredding. And I think that goes with a lot of development. There's always a hope that things are received in the ways that you think they could be received, and that things connect with and resonate with players. But you're never totally sure until it gets out there. And that goes both ways. Sometimes something that you think is going to land really well and touch a lot of people doesn't as much or has a lot of mixed reactions. And other times people connect to and get enthusiastic and glob onto something that you had no idea people would be as excited about or connected to. So there's always a lot of uncertainty. It's one of the scariest parts of the job, but it's also one of the most thrilling when it does have the chance to get out there. On the subject of player expectations, I want to make sure I remember the question right. You were describing that how do you think about player expectations and separate that from what you want to do versus what you expect the players to do? Do you mind if he clarifies?
So basically, it's how do you balance expectations with the art you want to make and what the player wants to see, and how does that affect your thought process in new projects?
Yeah, good question. So there's a couple different sides to this. At the highest level, when it comes to the story that we want to tell or the kind of game we want to make, Naughty Dog is very lucky that we have a lot of trust from PlayStation. We have a lot of trust from our players, which means we tend to make what we want to make. Like, there's a great deal of privilege that we have in order to have found success so far, to have people at the helm that really know what they're doing, and so to be able to decide for our next project we want to do this, and then be kind of supported and resourced in order to do that. But at the same time, we also, something that is often surprising to folks, we focus test our games very deeply. We have folks anonymously come into the studio. We set up specific play testing as we go along. And people are playing through unfinished builds of the game with a lot of our scrutiny. We have almost like closed camera feeds up where we're watching players play the game and seeing where they get lost and where they get frustrated and where they get stuck. And so even though we don't tend to let the public make big steering decisions about what kinds of games we want to make next, at the micro level about making it the best experience it can be for people, we are constantly scrutinizing and evaluating and making adjustments based on what players are excited by or frustrated by or things like that. So the annoying short answer is that we do both of those things. We commit to the things that we want to make, but then also we look for every way that we can in order to make something that we think will land the best. Absolutely.
Hi, my name is Pedro.
Hi.
I have two questions.
Okay.
The first one is, looking back, what skill or experience most helped you stand out when you were trying to break into the industry? Mm-hmm. And the second one is, when designing a game, how do you balance lessons from your past projects and your own creative intuition?
Awesome. Okay, so a lot of the skills I would echo back here. I'll say again, one of the ones I think that helped me differentiate from folks, or was kind of a A thing I didn't expect to lean on, but have leaned on a lot, is that bendy, improvisational, collaborative kind of skill set. I can program. I know my way around a scripting language, but I would not describe myself as an absolute rock star technical problem solver. What I can do is know who is, or know what questions to ask, or know how to start to get us to a creative solution that will end up working out for people. And so that kind of aspect of being able to just take steps forward and collaborate with people and communicate in good faith, I would say, it is a skill that, alongside all of the awesome technical aspects that get talked about here, really was useful for me. On the, memory game. Second question was, refresh me, I'm so sorry.
Like how you balance lessons from your past projects
Yes.
with your creative intuition.
Project to project to project. So we're always learning things on given projects. I'm working on my second big new project at Naughty Dog right now with Intergalactic, since I started on Last of Us Part 2. But also I helped out with our ground-up remake of the first Last of Us, our remastered Last of Us Part 2, as well as, for a brief period, our short-lived multiplayer project that ended up being canceled. And each time, we absolutely learn a lot. We absolutely take what we've learned from project to project, both technically and, oh yeah, we had to solve this on the last project when we needed Nathan Drake to do this thing with his rope. Let's figure out with Ellie doing a similar thing with her rope. Like, there are a benefit of having long-standing veterans at the studio is, oh yeah, 10 years ago when I needed to figure out how to do this for Uncharted, this was what I thought about. How would we do that now, et cetera. And also, a challenge is that we are always trying to do new things, and we are always trying to not rest on making exactly the same kinds of games and with the same kinds of challenges as we've done in the past. So we often find ourselves facing things that we don't have a clear example of exactly how we've done that in the past, and requires a whole new brand of creative problem solving. And I think that's kind of where the fun is. It's where the heart is, but it's also a really exciting part about being at a studio there that's never satisfied to, try to re-execute the same kind of stuff. So it's a challenge. Thank you. Yeah, let's get to the back. We got our front row, folks.
Hi, I'm Jota.
Hi.
As someone who works at Naughty Dog,
I do, yes.
Yes. You mentioned Naughty Dog is always striving to be the best it can be, and it has graced us with some of the best games ever, The Last of Us Part 2, Uncharted. I'm wondering how you balance the pressure of working at such a big studio that has sent out into the world so many great games, but also the fact that you know that not every project is going to be The Last of Us and Uncharted.
Yeah.
How do you balance that pressure and the expectations of that company?
I appreciate that. It's a really good question, and it's really hard. Because while we're lucky, in the ways I talked about, to have people that have done this before, people with proven skill sets in order to make games like this, you're never really sure. And I'd encourage folks, if you're interested, we've put out some documentaries in the past on the making of The Last of Us. We put out one called Grounded 2 that's on the making of Part 2. And you can see in folks talking through, those are my coworkers and directors, even looking back on what that game is and what it has become, in the moment, you're never really sure that this thing is going to either be able to be pulled off at all, or resonate with people the way that you hope, or strike a chord and become successful. And that, to me, is exacerbated the more titles that we put out. The bigger our pedigree is as a studio, the more massive those expectations are for what the next thing is. And I think there's two ways that everybody handles this differently, but there's two ways that I tend to think about it. One is with the last coin, the flip side of be serious. Just don't take it that seriously. It's okay if a thing is not, to every person, the gold medal thing that they could possibly find in a game. And releasing myself a little bit from the need for exactly the validation of it being the best it can possibly be. I'm still working on it in some ways, but it is a very necessary part of the pressure process. And the other aspect, like any heavy weight, is the more people that you have underneath it to shoulder it, the lighter the load is. And so in our case, I find I'm able to lean on and just take solace in my coworkers and my peers and folks who are in many ways stronger and smarter and more talented than I, to give me the confidence that what we're working on is actually really special. And no matter whether it's a big hit or a middling flop, I don't think anything would be a middling flop, but no matter what the stakes of it, it's something that I can feel proud of and that I can feel like I share with the team.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So one last question.
Back corner over there.
Hi. I want to ask, you studied computer science,
Yes.
and I want to ask, how did you transition, I guess, from that to game design and working with all those systems? Because it seems quite different, and I don't,
Yeah,
just that.
great question. So what's your name again?
Eric.
Okay, thank you. I glazed over this a little bit in my talk, but the technical game design work at Naughty Dog is very computer science heavy. Our scripting language is a very robust one. It lets us get pretty close to the metal. And so for most of my 8 years here, I've been doing work that is in some ways comparable to a gameplay programmer or the kinds of things that has certainly a level of technical depth. The challenge for me came in two places. First, back in college, like I was saying, I had friends that really wanted to be software engineers and really wanted to be computer programmers, and I wasn't so sure about that. That Activision internship that I mentioned, it was a lucky time because at the time, normally when a game studio wanted to get an internship, they would be very specific, and so a given studio needs an animation intern. We're going to go to a nearby school and scoop up animation majors and let them be our animation intern, which wasn't really for me because I was kind of our school didn't have a video game program of any kind. I didn't have any video game classes as an undergrad. Everything I knew about video games, I either played or cobbled together from talks like this or YouTube video deep dives or video essays from the design of my favorite games. And so when I applied to this internship, I applied as a programmer. I said they had little boxes you could check for whether you were interested in game programming. And then I got to the interview and they handed me a piece of paper to fill out some information. And it said, circle what you are here for. And there was game design and game programming. And I circled both. And I walked in and I handed them the paper. And I said, look, here's my story. I can program. I'd be delighted to learn more about what being a programmer is. But what I'm really interested in is game design. And so if there's any openness to that, I'd love to talk about this being a design interview. And they said, okay, great. This was with, at the time, some of the higher ups at Infinity Ward, who were actually the next talk we're going to hear from someone at Infinity Ward. They said, what are you playing right now, and what do you think about it? At the time, it was Overwatch. I was like big into Overwatch. This was 2017, whatever. And I took them through what I was playing, and what I thought about it, what I thought the great design choices of Overwatch were, and what I thought were terrible design choices in Overwatch. The capture the flag's never going to work in this kind of game, whatever. I was drawn and going deep. And it was so eye-opening for me because I had just gone through a lot of programming interviews for tech companies and whiteboard pseudocoding and all of that sort of thing. And I felt so much more energized and excited by this one design interview talking about games that I had been playing than I had personally from software engineering side. Now, that's not to knock on software engineering. I love folks being enthusiastic about programming and technology and everything. But for me, that ended up being the right fit. And so what that meant was coming to Naughty Dog, they needed a technical background in order to do this kind of tech design job. Absolutely, the kinds of scripting problem solving that I was doing was coding. But at the same time, that game design, both passion and kind of ability to articulate my thoughts and creative ideas, and the ability to back that up by putting together prototypes and solving problems in the moment and rapidly iterating, ended up being a fusion that worked out pretty well for me. So hope that answers that question.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.